displaying some of the work that is done in the context of a European Commission funded project. So I thought let's start by telling you a bit more about the project, then tell you about some of the exhibits and what you're going to see in this exhibition, and then move on to giving you a little bit of overview of my take of what's going on in terms of natural dyes on textiles at the moment globally. So first of all, I'd like to take you back 3 years ago in January 2022 when the European Commission opened the funding call looking at revitalizing traditional crafts. So it was actually called Traditional Crafts for the Future. And we started discussions with a group of researchers, other bodies interested in traditional crafts, traditional dyeing across Europe, and that's how we joined a consortium of members where we are actually interested in looking at making those traditional crafts, looking specifically at colorants and colorants on textiles, making those future-proof to a great degree, understanding and making sure we have some information that is safely recorded. So I should have made slightly better notes in terms of the words I wanted to use, but I'm hoping you understand my what I'm trying to say. So our aim is to revive, valorize, foster traditional crafts. So those were all requests from the European Commission, what they wanted the response to the call to actually address. And so we worked through obviously a lot of ideas, and we ended up with partners, so obviously us here at Leeds. We also have 2 entities in in Finland, so University of Helsinki, and also near me. We have partners in Estonia and Tartu, and we have partners in France. So we are obviously a European consortium, that's the general idea, working together, and also Belgium, thank you. Yes. So a number of members in the consortium, all adding a lot of value, adding a lot of perspective, and we're obviously working together to produce some really interesting work that will, as I said, revalorize and help traditional crafts from Europe continue into the future, so a degree of future-proofing there. So we have 4 main areas of work, activities that we're looking at, and some of the work presented today addresses most of those areas. The first one is looking at traditional arts and crafts, understanding some of the traditional procedures, particularly in the Northern Baltic area, where there's very little that's actually recorded. So we're trying to understand and rediscover some of the traditional knowledge from those areas, and then make a really good record of those so that they can be used in some way and continue to be used in some way. We have another set of activities that's looking at how a number of things, but including how colour, dyeing with natural dyes, etc., is communicated, taught in institutions, and also to a degree how it's then used contemporarily today in Europe. We then have another set of activities that is looking at how we can make modern versions, let's say, of natural colorants. So understanding what are the colorants in natural colorants, so their nature, but also can we modify them with benign chemistry. But that means things that obviously have very low to no impact on the environment, so that they remain benign, so have lower impact, sustainability issues, perhaps than synthetic dye stuff and colorants, and yet address some of the modern needs of textiles. As I'll talk a little bit later, there are some downsides to some of the natural colorants as we know them, that obviously people are trying to address, and this is one of the things that we're doing in that activity. And then the fourth activity is looking at the future. How do we then take traditional knowledge, traditional dyes, or new forms of natural dyes, and make sure that we can use them in the future? How can we use them in new modern techniques, including digital techniques, or using tools that were obviously not available 100 years ago, but would make the industry value and reconsider, be able to reuse those natural dyes in different contexts. So what will you see today? So you will see the work performed, as I said, within this project, the Colourful Crafts project. And so you can see different things actually around this space. Looking in the entrance area on your left as you enter, I suppose, and right if you're turning around and looking, you will see work produced from a process called inkjet printing. Inkjet printing, you might be familiar with the process on paper, maybe also on textiles. So the idea is to create inks that contain a colorant, and those are very accurately deposited onto the substrate, so here on textile. And inkjet printing on textile is known. It's commercially very relevant. It offers a lot of really interesting advantages from an aesthetic point of view, as well as from a commercial business plan point of view. So there's definitely a valid industry that relies on inkjet printing on textile. But there is no solution using natural colorants for a variety of reasons. And so what we've done in this project is looking at how we can use some of those dyes and create the inks and use them to print on textiles. There's a couple of things in particular that we've looked at, which are the pre-treatment on the fabric. By that I mean that a lot of natural dyes don't naturally adhere to the textiles. You can deposit them, but they would come off as you wash, particularly, or maybe also rub. And so they need a pre-treatment, which traditionally is called a more damping process. But we've been looking at other ways using more modern chemical knowledge to avoid some of the more traditional molting, which can be not particularly time efficient, amongst other things. So you'll see some of the work that we've done on inkjet printing, where we're looking at the colour gamut. One of the aspects of natural dyes is the fact that they do not necessarily reach the same amount of colours as we can through synthetic dye stuff. So we're interested in looking at what colours can we actually produce with natural dyes, so that a designer, creator of a textile idea, concept, and eventually a product knows what the limitations actually are. So there's some lovely colours, but certainly not all the colours of the gamut. By that I mean not all the colours we can perceive can be created with those natural dyes. So this is what we've been working on, and most of that exhibition here on the right will show. What it also shows is some of the sources of those natural dyes. So we've given an example of the plant where the natural dye comes from, if we have that. The powder, so the extraction, the colorant that's been extracted through whatever process, usually using maybe water as a solvent to extract the colorant, dry that powder so we have colorant concentrated, and then we can formulate that in an ink. And we've also got a sample of the ink, so you can see a variety of forms of what we've used effectively to create the colour. What you also have in that cabinet is some little paper doilies that have been created by Dr. Irini Bukla, who, if you're here, you probably know Irini. She's clearly a local artist, and she has been using the inks that we created with the context of her own work, looking at hospitality, and they've created the little doilies. They are very discreetly positioned in the cabinet, so I invite you to take a particular look at that. So this is what you'll see on the cabinet to my right, and obviously if you leave through those doors, this is also to the right. To the left, there's a handful of exhibits there as well. We have some of the work that we've done on using supercritical carbon dioxide as a dyeing medium. So that's quite a mouthful, but effectively what we're saying is that we can use other mediums rather than water to carry colour to a textile. In this particular case, we're using carbon dioxide, and you're familiar with the fact that it's a gas, it's linked to aspects like global warming. But here, this is the gas that we capture from other industrial activities. It's not released to the environment, so the process keeps, so it doesn't create CO2, it uses CO2 and keeps it as a solvent. So rather than water, we can use that gas, compress it into a form that's called supercritical fluid, and it then is a very useful medium to carry some dye stuff to some fibres. And so we've looked at how we can use natural dyes within this medium. So it's obviously quite different from using water, and not all the traditional natural dyes are suitable for that process. But you can see some exhibit of some textile dyed, so polyester and acetate textiles that we've dyed with extracts from madder, so alizarin. We've also dyed with emodin, which is a colorant again, obviously, that we can extract from plants like rhubarb, buckthorn, Japanese knotweed, and the third colorant, I'm going to have to look at my cheat sheet because curcumin, of course, curcumin. So extracted from turmeric. So those are three examples of some of the colorants that we find we can use in this innovative fluid and apply to synthetic textile or derived textile such as acetate. What you also see in this cabinet is another piece of work where we're looking at the technical element of natural dyes. So we would tend to think natural dyes in terms of the aesthetic, the colour it actually brings, but there is also a hidden element, a more technical element that is of value, which is how much they absorb light, so how coloured they are outside of the visible spectrum. So we tend to think of colour as something that we can see and perceive, but there's actually also colour outside of the spectrum that we as humans cannot perceive, but certain animals can perceive, and also tools, instruments can perceive. So we'll be looking at particularly the range of light that's called the near infrared, and that is very important in terms of camouflage, but also in terms of heat retention, so keeping the wearer, for example, if it's a garment, warm by trapping the infrared radiation, the near infrared radiation. And so we've been looking at leaves, so you'll see some spectra of leaves where we're looking at the plant themselves, how they interact with the light in the near infrared. So we can't see this, but obviously the plant does that. And also we've been looking in particular at one type of natural colorant called chlorophyllin. So chlorophyllin is chlorophyll extracted from whatever vegetation you wish. In our case, we're talking about grass, so imagine fields of meadows, and then we harvest the grass, and rather than drying it and feeding our farm animals with it or pets, we actually extract the chlorophyll, can do a very small, benign chemical modification to improve stability, and now we can use it as a textile colorant. And this is one of the dye stuff we've worked with inkjet printed. Some of the other work that's being displayed here today, but also interestingly, what's made from red absorbents is one of the things that are displayed in that cabinet. The final element that's in the cabinet is, again, an artistic take on natural colorants, which is an eco-printing process where actual leaves are taken, not any leaves, but the right type of leaves are taken from vegetation, applied between paper and textile. This is wrapped really tightly on a cylinder, so it could be a rod or a pipe. So wrapped really tightly, wrapped with material, and then dipped in iron solutions, so that we then have a reaction between the iron, the leaf, and we get an imprint on the textile and the paper. So quite an interesting traditional element, so some modern take on that process that you can see in that cabinet. What we're also displaying are some contemporary work by artists or commercial entities using natural dyes. And those are links in particular that have been fostered through trying to understand how natural dyes are being used today by individual practitioners, but also industry. So again, very clearly as part of the context for this project. And so you've got here, for example, work from the practitioner Elizabeth Edwards. So some of her work here using elderberry, cochineal, iron, acid, alkali to create a number of shades and hues from colorant. I think there's logwood as well. If I looked at my notes, I could say, but as you're going to have a proper look at all the exhibits later, you'll see we've written all of that, obviously in the captions as well. Some of the work here, some of the work from AO Textile. They are a company who specializes in using natural dyes in a commercial setting, so making natural dyes, very high quality textiles from them. So there's work presented where they work with the designer, Dr Milner, work with a very well-renowned weaving entity. So you'll see some of the lovely work they've done there as well, some jacquard fabrics. So they're using dyes like indigo, madder, weld. So those are all names you might have come across as traditional natural dyes. So that's what you can see over there on the wall. And then in the cabinets, we've also got the work from our colleague, Dr Bintan Sari, where Bintan is using both some traditional techniques, particularly from Indonesia, which is called stitch resist, and she is using natural dye stuff, particularly some of the ones that we've been using elsewhere, so that we have continuity and eco in our process. And so you can see some of her artistic creations there, as well as a link to the process of creating those pieces of work. So as you can see, a range going from quite technical to very much contemporary artistic take, and this is indeed what we're doing on the project. We're merging all of this and understanding where and how we can move natural colorants into the future, which leads me on to what actually are natural colorants, because I've actually not really spent any time telling you about this, and almost assuming everybody knows. But the reality is that nowadays there are effectively, I would say, 3 different types of natural colorants. There's the one that you probably are thinking of because they are the traditional colorants. They are the madder, the weld, maybe the indigo. So those are all colorants that we find in some of our more ancient textiles with processes that have evolved over time, but still very much steeped in old practices. And indeed, we use quite a lot of those on the project. Those are usually extracted from plants, and they, so the plants tend to be grown for the purpose of extracting, creating colorants. So while we have a lovely range of colors, they clearly require particular resources in growing the plant to extract the colorant to then be used on the textile, which requires a particular system, requires resources, as I said, land, water, etc. So those are probably the more traditional, the more understood colorants, but there's definitely a trend in creating natural colorants from waste from other streams. So for example, is there any agricultural waste that we can now divert, extract colorant and use that as a modern form of colorants? Do we then have colors that are useful on textiles? And by useful, I mean obviously color that appeals, but also have a good quality of fastness. By that I mean resistance to things like washing, wearing, certainly light, etc. So can we extract colorants from waste so that we maximize the values of other sort of other producers or products from other industries? So that's our second type. Our third type, and something that we've been actively looking at as part of Colourful Crafts, is can we use microorganisms to produce colorants? And again, this is in two different ways. One of them is, so by microorganism, I'm thinking things like bacteria, fungi, and those can be grown in a very safe environment with relatively easy, you feed them. So for example, bacteria require food source, sugar, water. They are incubated, they're made to divide and grow, etc. And if you select the right strain, so the right type, they might by themselves create a particular colorant. So some strains might produce something like indigo, so saving us from having to grow plants or make from petroleum. So that's one area. Can we produce colorants through those microorganisms? Can we select, make sure that we have really good yields, so then we have good value as well as good quality colorants that are useful in the textile industry? One other stream is looking at using those microorganisms to create the building blocks of the colorants. So we are still looking at chemistry, making colorants, but this time we are making them not from petrochemicals, but entirely from naturally produced starting blocks, effectively chemicals. So created by those microorganisms. So potentially the future of natural colorants, all those biocolorants, being created through microorganisms to serve our textile industry, and hopefully then maybe perhaps extend the gamut, the range of colors that we otherwise can find a little bit limiting with natural dye stuff. So this was, in a nutshell, or not so much a nutshell, what I wanted to talk to you about. Obviously I'm here to talk about the project if anybody wants to discuss that in any more detail, but otherwise please do have a look at our various exhibits and hope you enjoy our exhibition. Thank you very much.